Alright everyone, and welcome back. This really isn't the second time that I'm doing this because I forgot to press hit and record. But anyway, how is everyone doing? And I hope you've had a good week. I hope you've had a good weekend. I hope you're having a good day. This one is a little bit of a different one. We haven't done something like this for quite a while, but we are doing the Pantheon exotic tier list. Now, you can get 5 exotics from completing Pantheon, and these are the Eyes of Tomorrow, Touch of Malice, the Collective Obligation, Conditional Finality, and 1000 Voices. So I'm going to go through them, rank them in my own personal tier list, and let me know down below what you think about this tier list by the end of the video, and if I've got any of these right or where you think that these should be ranked. First up, we've got the Eyes of Tomorrow Raid Exotic Heavy Rocket Launcher. Now, this comes from the Deepstone Crypt Raid, which launched way back with Beyond Light. Now, this thing is a little bit underrated, to be honest, and not everybody loves it. It doesn't do immense boss melting damage or anything like that, and it kind of is just in its own little niche in terms of it being a ad clearing heavy rocket launcher, which is not something that anybody wants to use, but it can be a good time, especially if you know how to use it or take advantage of it in certain areas where it is really good. Gambit one of them, but obviously nobody plays Gambit. But also the new Onslaught playlist, where this thing can and does absolute bits in that mode, especially if you know how to use it. Now, the Eyes of Tomorrow is a tracking, multiple firing rocket launcher, and on defeating 4 or more combatants in a single volley, it will increase the damage of the next volley by 50%, and it also refunds ammo. Now, this refunding of ammo is from thin air, and so effectively if you do defeat 4 or more enemies, then you can just basically use this thing as a primary ammo weapon. That is why it is so good in the Onslaught playlist. We've done a few builds on the channel with this thing recently, and it is absolutely insane if you use it in the right places. It can also work nicely with a few of the seasonal artifact mods in terms of using blast radius and becoming radiant, and you can increase the damage of this thing by quite a bit, but like I say, it's not something that is really good for dealing with boss damage, basically because of how Bungie have coded this thing to do significantly less damage to bosses than other enemies in the game for some reason. And so for that reason, even though it is fun, it can do bits depending on where you use it. It isn't really that good, and to be honest, this thing is C tier. Moving on to the Touch of Malice, this is the kinetic exotic scout rifle which came with the returning Kingsfall raid, and this thing is one of the best high DPS exotic primaries in the game currently, but tons of people don't use it. It really is slept on, and I think the only reason that it is slept on is because of the exotic perk, which once you do get to that final round in the magazine, even though you are technically dealing 120% more damage, you are also dealing damage to yourself and draining your health, effectively leaving you one shot. So even though you do have some insane damage output and can do some really good stuff with certain builds in the game, however, you can also get your own health back by defeating 3 targets rapidly, and it also comes with its own exotic catalyst, which you can do by getting into the Kingsfall raid and completing some of the mini challenges, and this will build up stacks of a blight launcher which you can then use to hold to reload, fire that blight at other targets, and it will also blind them, but it will also allow you to do another extra 50% increased damage, not only from the Touch of Malice but from other weapons of sorrow, including Thorn, Malfeasance, and Witherhoard, I believe. And because it is just so good damage output wise, then I think this thing is going in A tier. Not the best, but it is still a great thing to use, and if you use it properly in some builds with Devour and stuff like that, it is really good. The next one that we've got on this tier list is the Collective Obligation, the Void Exotic Pulse Rifle. Now, this thing is going to be absolutely nuts in just a few weeks time because Bungie are basically giving it a 38% damage buff. This thing was already really good as it was, because just the synergy that it has with Void builds is just absolutely through the roof, and for good reason. This thing really is going to be a popular choice, and if you can tie this one down in Pantheon before the final shape, it is absolutely worth getting. The Void Leech exotic perk is going to allow you to leech void debuffs from enemies, whether they are suppressed, weakened or volatile, and then once you have fully charged the Void Leech, you can effectively hold to reload, and in this mode you do 20% more damage. You also then inflict them void debuffs onto targets, so if you've got all three of them, that target is just basically going to be melted. And also in terms of other void synergy that you can get with this one, with the Umbral Sustenance perk, then when you have Devour, Avoid Overshield or become invisible, this will automatically reload the weapon, and so it has some really good synergy not only with all void subclasses but with certain ones specifically. Obviously Devour is super easy to do on Warlocks, Void Overshield's really good for Titans, and Invisibility is the name of the game for Void Hunters, and so Collective Obligation really does fit nicely into any number of Void builds. With that 38% damage buff, the 20% damage increase that it already does, and just its synergy that it has with tons of builds, then Collective Obligation really is one that you need to be tying down, and for that reason this thing is going in S tier. Moving on, and we've got the Conditional Finality, which is the exotic shotgun which dropped from the Root of Nightmares raid, which came with the Lightfall DLC. Now this thing is absolutely bonkers. It's been terrorizing PvP, it absolutely does bits in PvE, and it's probably one of my most favourite exotic weapons ever in the history of Destiny. Now this thing, I would imagine, is where Bungie started playing with the idea of the prismatic subclass, because this actually does have synergy with both stasis and solo subclass setups. It has 2 rounds in the magazine, with the first shot being stasis and the second one being solar, and if you manage to land 10 out of the 12 pellets on a target, then that stasis shot will freeze targets, and likewise 10 out of 12 shots with that solar shot, it will ignite targets. Now for that reason this thing just is absolutely bonkers, as you can imagine, and it has tons of synergy with both stasis and solar subclass builds, but you don't even need to have them subclass builds either, because anything you run with Conditional Finality is already 100 times better. Now obviously with the freezing and ignitions that this thing hands out, then you can also deal with unstoppable champions intrinsically, but just because how good this exotic really is, you can also deal with overload champions. You can deal with barrier champions if you time it and interrupt their barriers. It really is just an absolutely immense weapon. If we had an S plus tier, which we don't, this is where it would be, and so because of that this is an S tier weapon, and if you haven't got this and you're running Pantheon, definitely go and get yourself the Conditional Finality exotic shotgun. Now then, lastly we've got the 1000 Voices, the heavy exotic solar fusion rifle, which came all the way back when with the Last Wish raid. Now this thing is a little bit underrated, a little bit slept on, and for good reason. It kind of was way behind the power curve for a long time, despite it being a raid exotic weapon and probably one of the rarer ones until recently. It is just one of them unique exotics in the Destiny sandbox. Bungie have given it a little bit of a buff, and now it has some solar subclass synergy. Effectively it is one slow continuous fire beam that if you land all the shots on target, it will ignite them, as long as you have the Ember of Ashes equipped with your solar subclass, because this thing intrinsically does apply Scorch to targets. Now because of that, obviously it does have a ton of solar subclass synergy, it can do a ton of damage, it'll deal with them unstoppable champions if you manage to cause an ignition, and it just really is just a good fun solar exotic weapon. If you haven't got this, then it's definitely worthwhile doing. Probably not worthwhile banging your head and trying to guess which chest to open in the Last Wish raid, but if you're running Pantheon and this one is one of the exotics that has eluded you up until recently, definitely go and pick this one up. It is not going to be S tier like some of the other exotics, but it is a good fun time, and because of that we are going to rank this one in B tier. So there we go, that's my exotic tier list breakdown of the Pantheon exotics. Like I said at the beginning, if you agree with these or not, let me know down in the comments. If you've been here before, then please consider subscribing or joining our fellow members to get some bonus goodies to show off in the comments. Thank you very much for everyone's ongoing support recently, it's been absolutely immense. Also, thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one, which you can click right here.